Hey race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Radio Network. Welcome to another edition of Drafting the Circuits Radio. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next 2 hours as we wrap up 2017 in a grand fashion. Let me introduce you to the panel we have assembled tonight. First off, a gentleman who has spent the better part of 3 decades involved in the sport. Gray Warren, how are you tonight?
Doing well. How about you, sir?
Doing very, very well. Also, a guy who's got experience with race teams on both sides of the pond, Richard Youden. Richard, how are you this evening?
I'm very good, thank you. Hope everybody else is doing well.
All right, and then we've got the NASCAR correspondent for Motorsports Tribune, Seth Eggert. Seth, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good.
All right, the managing editor and CEO of Motorsports Tribune and writer for IndyCar.com, Joey Barnes.
Hi.
Hi, Joey. Also joining us tonight, guest panelist Josh Farmer.
Feels like forever since I've been on here, but I'm glad you guys had me back.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate you coming back. So let's start off tonight on a bit of a sad note. Legendary NASCAR team owner, Hall of Famer Bud Moore passed away. I believe he was 92 or 93. But Bud's been legendary name in the sport for a long time. Going back to the old days. I mean, I probably remember him best running Ricky Rudd and Bobby Allison in the 80s. But, Gray, you've been involved in the sport for a long time. You probably crossed paths with Bud Moore. So let's. What are your thoughts on Bud Moore and what he meant to the sport?
Bud Moore was an icon in the sport, no doubt. One of the early pioneers. He was a car owner for many of the greats in the sport. A lot of the greats have driven for him over the years. He was, of course, a staple in stock car racing, but he branched out in the Trans Am series back in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s actually, and had drivers like George Fulmer and Dan Gurney and Parnelli Jones, among a few that drove his car. He was very successful in that. Very successful NASCAR owner. A lot of people don't know that he was a World War II veteran. He was a tank driver in World War II. He was an American hero, and he's one of the dying breed in our sport. That's our connection to the past. Men like Bud Moore, Glenn and Leonard Wood, Dale Inman, Richard Petty. A lot of those guys are up in their 80s and 90s, and when they're gone, a lot of the history of the sport's going to be gone. And I, for one, am very sad to see Bud go. But have a lot of good memories of him working around the racetrack for many years. A lot of great stories that he could tell. But and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, very very deserving honor that he got several years ago. And he'll always be remembered for what he meant to the sport. He was an innovator and a racer. I guess that's the highest compliment you can pay to anybody in our business is to refer to them as a racer, and Bud indeed was that.
Now, Seth, you're a keen follower of NASCAR as well, and you've not been around long as Gray or I, but I know you're a keen historian of the sport too. So what are some thoughts on Bud Moore?
Well, Bud Moore's had some of the greats in NASCAR drive for him. Dale Earnhardt, Buddy Baker, as Gray alluded to, Bobby Allison, Ricky Rudd. Even before he got involved in the sport, he was a hero. He went and he fought in World War II. He stormed the beaches of Normandy. He single-handedly captured an entire German regiment or company. I forget exactly how many people it was. But overall, he was a hero to many, not just for what he did in the sport, but what he did outside the sport. He'll definitely be missed.
Absolutely, and our thoughts are with his family and those close to him. So, rest in peace, Bud Moore. True inspiration to the sport. Like Gray said, one of the legends, one of the greats, and that whole breed is dying off now, and it's sad as we the next generation is coming to take over the sport. So, but let's turn our attention to the final Formula One race of the season at the Yas Marina circuit out there in Abu Dhabi. Beautiful little racetrack, cool race. Lewis Hamilton winning there, saying he wanted to win, but it was Valtteri Bottas who bested him in qualifying and on the track. After the fact, Lewis downplayed it a little bit, said he really didn't try that hard, but I don't know if that's the case. But a lot of storylines in there in the middle of the pack there, after the 30-second gap between the Mercedes and the rest of the world on the track there. So, Richard, you watched the race out there. What are your thoughts coming out of Abu Dhabi?
I think you're seeing a lot of what we saw at the tail end of 2016 there. Sorry, 2015, where Lewis wraps up the championship early and then goes on this little slump for the last few races. Now, he says he hasn't been partying like he was out in 2015, but I think he probably has been on a few late nights. And he's let Valtteri sort of get the better of him in the last few weeks, and in the same way that Rosberg did going into 2016. So, Lewis has got to be careful that he doesn't let it slip. He doesn't want history to repeat itself. Valtteri's taken this opportunity to sort of, make the guys at Mercedes remember that he's, still around, and that he's, he's quick and he's competitive and he can get the job done when needed. And it was a very impressive drive from Valtteri. There was one phase of the race where Lewis was given a pretty simple instruction on brake bias, which is not unusual for the drivers in the middle of the race, and he gave a very agitated response. So obviously Lewis was trying, and so Valtteri got under his skin a little bit this weekend, and that could set up for a fantastic rivalry next year. Hopefully it won't get as petulant as the Rosberg-Hamilton relationship got, but it was that end of things was pretty interesting. There was an interesting dynamic potentially going on there. Further back in the pack, of course, I think that the most intense battle was probably between the three teams for the was it sixth place in the championship, I believe, between Renault, Toro Rosso, and Haas. Renault, as I think has been the case for certainly the second half of the season, had that one covered reasonably well. Now they've got two drivers there in Hülkenberg and Sainz Jr. who can push each other reasonably hard. I think they've stepped their game up, both on the driver's front and also the technical side there, and they did the business. But Toro Rosso, you're potentially lacking that Renault support, should we say, with Toro Rosso going off to the Honda engines next year, and also, of course, Renault naturally wanting their own works team to be the success there. And Haas really have struggled the second half of the season with reliability and consistent performance on the car. So Renault did what they had to do. They got the job done there. The numbers, the difference there was ranging in about the $14 to $15 million mark. So certainly quite a bit of cash, extra cash there for the Renault team, and probably that won't affect them. It's obviously probably a bigger loss to Haas and Toro Rosso than it is a gain to Renault with the factory backing now. But it's setting itself up nicely for 2018.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the situation over this past weekend, and some of the key things I take away from it are, first part, going to the Lewis-Valtteri thing, I don't really think, maybe Lewis was trying a little bit in the race, but let's be honest, Lewis knows that Valtteri is just a clear-cut number two. It's not like him and Rosberg. So the ability to be a team player a little bit more so because he knows that Valtteri is fighting to just get second place. It's a mark for Mercedes. It helps Lewis. It helps everybody. So I think there was maybe more of that going on since he wrapped up the championship. But you could argue the same thing back in sort of 2014-15 when Rosberg really, couldn't hold anything to Hamilton, would the odd couple of races, but again was pretty much a clear number two. It was only really 2016 where Rosberg sort of stepped up and got that, put it to him, if you like, for want of a better phrase. And maybe it was because he had a good end to 2015 that gave Rosberg the confidence. Maybe, but I look at that also as more so of the attitude structure built within the team. I mean, that was Rosberg's team before Lewis jumped on board, and he was essentially trying to knock Rosberg down a peg, and that wasn't going to happen, not at least from Rosberg's point of view. I think you look at this situation, and it's Lewis's team now, and Valtteri comes in knowing that he's kind of just got to he had to earn his spot on the team and kind of be accepted from the group and go out there and do the job. And I think that's kind of the different dynamic that's being portrayed. But, I mean, obviously this could be a stepping stone into next year. Not a lot changes except for a hyper soft tire, which was being tested the last couple of days, which Ferrari swept both test sessions, if that means anything. But I think the more I look at the dynamic of the season, the one underlying thing that I wanted to bring up is Fernando Alonso had never actually lost to a teammate, in a head-to-head battle at all ever in his career. And for all the glitz and glamour and notes that we give Fernando Alonso for such a good run this year, and he was just so strong at all these places, putting in such a great run until his engine went kaboom. I think the biggest thing I take away is Stoffel Van Dorn had a chance. Obviously, he didn't succeed. He finished 12th out of the points. Fernando finished in the points, and he didn't overthrow him. But the fact is we should be giving Stoffel Van Dorn a lot more props for the way he ran this season. Very under the radar, doing his thing, to even have a chance to be in that conversation, to be the first guy to upset Fernando, because Fernando has had some pretty notable teammates in his career. But beyond that, I think I want to reflect a little, since this is the season finale show, what have you. Richard, on this one, just bear with me on it. You feel like if we run into a situation, and I know we'll never know the answer to this, but playing what ifs a little bit here, I almost feel like if Rosberg was in the mix this year, one of two things would have happened. He would have continued to be in Lewis Hamilton's head, and they would have just had something so destructive that it would have been so combative each and every race. It would have been to Mercedes' detriment, and you would have seen Vettel kind of sneak in there and steal this championship somehow, or Lewis would have been just even more unbeatable than what we saw parts of the second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think my opinion on that is that you would have seen Lewis dominate Rosberg this year. I think Lewis dropped off at certain races at certain times this year because he didn't have Rosberg to go up against. The way that Rosberg won the championship last year, from the moment that the checkered flag dropped in Abu Dhabi last year, for all of a week or whatever it was, Hamilton's sole aim for 2017 was to defeat Rosberg. No matter what it took, he would have moved heaven and earth to beat Rosberg. That was his sole objective. And we talked about it before. Rosberg played an absolute blinder by saying, "Okay, see you later, guys." That would have destroyed Hamilton, because he knows that this championship this year isn't on the same level because he didn't have that competition within the team. No matter where Valtteri is on the pecking order of drivers, you're not going to walk into a team first year and be competitive and be able to beat Lewis on a regular basis. There was times this year when he did show that, but there were also times this year when Lewis sort of let him. I think of Sochi, for example, where Lewis just didn't have a good week. I don't think you'd have seen those weekends if Rosberg had been in the car. I think that scenario and that dynamic, in a way, was lost. But also from Rosberg's perspective, Rosberg, let's be honest, Rosberg knows deep, deep down that he is not the caliber of driver that Hamilton is. He is a very, 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 very capable driver. He is a world champion. You can't take that away from him. But on raw pace and raw ability, he is not on the same level as Hamilton. As much as people like or dislike Hamilton, Rosberg is not on the same level.
I can't disagree with.
And Rosberg will know that. And he's known that he got into Hamilton's mind. And Rosberg played, to my mind, an absolute blinder by turning around and saying, "See you later, guys. I'm off." That would have destroyed Hamilton. Mentally, it would have ruined him because he didn't have that target. He didn't have that purpose, that raison d'etre, for want of a better word, the thing that would drive him every morning to get up and spend an extra hour in the gym or whatever, or take his dog on an extra long walk or whatever it may be. There was that little thing missing, and I think, I genuinely think that if Rosberg would have been there, you would have seen a better Hamilton this year, and I think he may have even wrapped the championship up earlier, because I think he would have dominated because he had that ruthless streak.
I look at the situation. I don't totally disagree. I think a lot was in question because we have a new car that came in this year for 2017. So getting the adaptability there, let's be honest, adaptability isn't necessarily Rosberg's strong suit. He's more of a technical driver, not necessarily pure talent based. Not a knock on his talent, but his talent compared to somebody like Vettel and Hamilton or even Alonso, we know where those levels stand. But as far as moving ahead, since we're supposed to be capping this season and looking ahead on different things a little bit, I'll just say this, is that we now have 2 4-time champions in the series. I don't remember the last time we had 2 4-time champions going head-to-head.
There never has been.
I don't think there ever have been,
Well, maybe when you had Vettel and Schumacher, did they do... No, they wouldn't have done, because Schumacher's last year was when Vettel won his 4th, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You could argue there was a period when Vettel had actually won the championship. There was maybe a couple of races in there where... I can't remember when Vettel wrapped up his 4th championship, if it was at the last race or not. But that's just splitting hairs, isn't it? Sorry.
No, but looking ahead, this is a situation in my mind. We've got 2 4-time champions. We got 2 guys, and it's kind of fitting that Hamilton won it because now, in my mind, everything's level. Ferrari's going to be a lot better next year. Mercedes obviously is going to improve, but I think we look at a situation where they're going to be about as level as we've ever seen them, more so than we saw at various times this year. And I think we're going to see a scenario play out where it is, may the best man win. It's going to be level, and I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be like an old-school boxing match, a couple of heavyweights going in there and going to battle, and I'm certainly a fan of those kind of battles. And I think that if Hamilton, if he needed any extra motivation with Rosberg not there, then it's pretty much who could be the first to 5. And I think that's what's going to be at stake next year for sure. But, looking at that, that's exciting. As far as some of the other things that we saw over the weekend, I never thought I would say this a day in my life, and maybe you agree with him on this, but Lewis Hamilton saying that Abu Dhabi needs to change some things up because that race had pretty much no overtaking. That was the worst race of the season.
In many ways. I mean, I think the one easy change they can make is remove that chicane before the hairpin.
Yep.
I think they got the track there. I believe they use it when they do the endurance races there. I don't understand why they slow the cars down more for that, that hairpin there. Personally, I think you'd run that hairpin. I know that Herman Tilke was asked by, I think it was Sky TV in the UK, what about the track, and he said that there is one. They do want to change one corner in the final sector, which he said would be a small change with a big difference. Now, maybe that's the case. I don't know. I never like a track, and I can't think of many others, that doesn't have an overtaking opportunity into turn 1. You got that. It's almost like they've just stuck the start-finish line in the middle of the backs, out the way. That should, to my mind, that start-finish line should be, going into the hairpin or going into the chicane at the end of the first long straight, and where the support race paddock is and the support race start-finish line is on that sort of second long straight you have further around the lap. So, silly little things like that, again, personal opinion, I think they could probably move that, but I know they've got a huge amount of infrastructure where they are, and that's probably never going to happen.
I feel like we need to run into a situation. I mean, when I look at tilt tracks, they all seem the same. They all race the same virtually. The only difference about his tracks that make it amazing are elevation changes. Any track that he's been a part of that has any increment of elevation changes. I look at Coda as a great example.
Yes, that's his best track, I think.
Yeah, and I look at the race this year with these kind of cars. That race was fantastic. It was the best race that they've had since they debuted there. Yeah. Ironically, it ended with a Hamilton-Vettel duel in the final laps, which was really cool. But more of that, and less of this. I mean, even Rossi had talked to me earlier in the year and said, he goes, Abu Dhabi's beautiful. The track's beautiful. I've got thousands of laps logged there, but it's boring to drive. He's like, but I go to Mid-Ohio, and it's run down. It needs some work, and this and that and the other, but you have a smile on your face every lap. And I think there's something like that. And to your point, maybe we need to move the start-finish line in a Mid-Ohio kind of way, away, where they actually start the races away from the start-finish line, maybe along the long straight before the hairpin. So,
talking about those typical tracks very quickly, probably, if to my mind anyway, the three best tracks he's designed, Kota's the only one we still go to. I think that the track in Istanbul at Turkey was a great track.
I love that track,
And then also Malaysia, which is one of his first tracks.
That was a good race too.
It's a good track, and it was a good race, and I think it's got some character to it. A lot of the other tracks he's involved with, I think, are pretty blah, for want of a better word. Basic, Azerbaijan's an interesting circuit, but pretty much he was given that was just colour by numbers rather than the blank canvas, wasn't it? There's only so many. You can't knock down a 2,000-year-old castle. Not now Bernie Eccleston's gone anyway. It's a shame that Malaysia's gone, and I think going away from what we're really talking about tonight, but Formula One does need to improve the standard of some of the tracks in terms of its spectacle. There are certain tracks out there which don't inspire people anymore. They don't, capture people's imaginations like a Spa or a Suzuka or a Silverstone to a certain extent. I know they've been around for a long time. There's a lot of sort of, history there, but Barcelona, they test there. Personally, I don't think you should ever test on a track that you race because it becomes too much of a procession. And when was the last time you had a good race in Barcelona?
Yeah, I agree.
Hungary, it's always interesting. It's a little bit different, but again, you struggle for a good race there. There's a number of tracks. These cars are fast. You need them to go fast. You need them to look like they're in. I mean, I've been lucky. I've been to Silverstone a few times, and when you stand in the Beckett's and Maggots complexes and see these cars doing what they do best, it's mind-blowing. It doesn't make sense to see them change direction at that sort of speed. And you get a little bit of that in Kota, and of course you get that through Rouge and 130R in Suzuka and places like that. But for Formula One to, if we're looking into the future, I think they really need to look to get back to some of those corners and some of those, like, as a spectator, you hold the breath watching cars. Never mind as a driver.
Yeah, I think to just put a cap on this part of the F1 deal is we used to go to tracks, and this is a little bit before my time, obviously, but going and watching some of the historical races, Brands Hatch comes to mind. Obviously, we're going to go to Paul Ricard again soon. Watkins Glen, tracks that had character, tracks that required guys to actually race the track with everything they got, as well as each other, simply to tested them to their limits. So, but
I'm not saying that places like Abu Dhabi don't test the drivers, but it doesn't look like it's testing them.
No. But to move on from that, some of the things that happened, because I know Frank's wanting us to probably move on here, even though it's a long show tonight.
Yeah, we can move on. I want to talk about, speaking of Abu Dhabi, the Formula One teams kind of stayed out there to test some Pirelli tires, and there's some stories coming out of there. I believe that Sebastian Vettel was fastest in the Ferrari, but a lot of eyes were on Robert Kubica, who's in frame for that seat at Williams and not Renault, Richard. So, Joey, I know you paid attention to the testing out there. Actually, you wrote a very nice article on Motorsports Tribune that I read earlier today. But talk us through some of what we saw at testing. We saw some new drivers behind the wheel there, evaluating drivers, as well as evaluating some of these new tire compounds that Pirelli has.
Yeah, so we had a 2-day test. Mentioned earlier, Ferrari swept both of them. Yesterday was Kimi Räikkönen leading the day one. Today, Vettel topped day two. Behind him, you had Valtteri Bottas, Max Verstappen, and then Force India in fourth and fifth with Perez leading Ocon. But honestly, what was kind of more astonishing here, to me anyway, we got Kubica. And by now, I'm sorry, but I'm Kubica'd out a little bit. Like we've heard this story. It's like Dale Jr.'s retirement tour. Put him in a seat, already, or send him off, whichever. I kind of agree with what Richard said earlier in the year that we should have seen him in the final race at Abu Dhabi, and Massa should have just left his ass in Brazil. But
Massa should have left his ass in Brazil a year ago, but that's a different story.
Yeah,
but back on before your Kubica out, all reports coming out of there that he's more than physically able to do the job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's erased a lot of doubt there, even though there's still a lot of naysayers out there. You got these freaking guys like Montoya and Villeneuve putting their 2 cents in, who are really not anywhere near what's going on there, and Gene Todt saying, hey, we'll leave it up to the doctors, and the doctors declare him fit. We've got no problem. So
There was a thing that Andrew Benson from BBC said, something along the lines that Massa was a decent range back from Vettel in qualifying. Well, Kubica is within a tenth of what Massa ran in qualifying, to comparable to what Vettel, the gap there. So, a quote unquote one-handed Kubica seems to be equally as quick as a retired Felipe Massa. So.
Retired Felipe Massa.
Yes, twice retired. I'll say this though. Also, is
that like a twice baked potato? Or refried beans? I don't know.
Probably not good either way. But Sergei Sorokin was also in the Williams seat today. Put in 86 laps before he handed it off to Kubica. Kubica nailed his final lap, which was the best for 7th overall towards the latter part of the day with Hypersofts on the car. Beyond that, to cap off this test, Charles Leclerc made the most laps at 148 on the day with Sauber. More on their little fun deal in a second, but on the Kubica situation, I think that he's fit for this seat. I think that he's somebody that if they're going to give a look to him, they need to hurry up and do it, because honestly, it's one of those situations that there's some other notables out there that you could put in that seat. But in terms of what they need, somebody over the age of 25 to fit the bill for Martini, somebody with experience. So, and honestly, another thing, somebody that gives them good press. They haven't had that in a minute. I know that, we saw Felipe Massa retire and Valtteri Bottas has gone on. The big notable that they've attained in the last year and a half is Paddy Lowe. That's it. I say what you will. I know that Lance Stroll's been good for him and whatnot this year. Been really good in some respects, but I think that when you really look at that organization and what's trying to be put forth, their best hire was bringing Paddy Lowe over, and now it's a matter of just blending him with a veteran driver that understands how to get on with the program. And I think that Kubica is somebody that gets that. He was good with BMW. He wouldn't be my first choice, but he's a good choice nonetheless. Beyond that, I just think they need to hurry up and make a selection. They've done all the testing. He's logged over a century mark in testing laps now over the 2 days. So you know what you know, and you know what you know from the Renault test as well. Pull the trigger or move on. That's my take on it.
I think it goes back to the point, Josh, you were making on the circuits that Formula 1 goes through and the layouts there. Formula 1 needs that sort of spark, that's something a little bit different, that sort of feel-good story. And I think that would be that would get far more, to put it bluntly, newspaper, column inches, him going back than it would be a Kvyat signing or a Sorokin or a De Resta signing. It captures people's imagination far more, and I think that's what Formula 1 needs. So even if more from a political standpoint than a performance standpoint, it's a good move for the sport.
Yeah, to put it in retrospect for you, Frank, there was a lot of people talking about Susie Wolff retiring from driving to go be wife to Toto, more so, and she'd never touched a Formula 1 car, really, to comparison to a lot of these guys. And that made more buzz in some respects than some of what's gone on in Formula 1 this year. So they definitely need a spark, to Richard's point. We can only hear Lewis Hamilton dominates by 30 seconds so many times this year. But, moving on to the Sauber thing that we talked about earlier, Alfa Romeo, is going to come back to Formula One after 20-plus years away from the sport. Ferrari engines are going to be on that car. We've known that for a while. Well, Ferrari's sister company, or whatever you want to call it, that they oversee in Alfa Romeo, they've decided that that's going to be badged on the side of a Sauber. I think it's awesome. I think if nothing else, it's different brand recognition to at least give the aesthetics that there's a lot of different manufacturers that play. The common fan that doesn't know the different variety of the company that goes on the side of these cars wouldn't pick up necessarily on that. I just think that this is a good move in many respects. It's different brand recognition for Ferrari. And let's be honest, if you run the way that Sauber typically runs, you really don't want it to say Ferrari on the side of that car. But
no, you don't. But Alfa Romeo is one of the oldest marques in racing. You know,
they won the first 2 championships in Formula One.
Yep, they've been around forever. Mm-hmm. Now, Alfa Romeo they are a subsidiary of Fiat Chrysler. And Fiat Chrysler once had Ferrari under their umbrella, although they've sold most of the shares of Ferrari back to Ferrari and privatized them, although they do still hold a small stake in there. They're still connected. But, Fiat Chrysler, Alfa Romeo, this is the closest you have to an American engine manufacturer in Formula One. So
that's pretty tenuous link there.
Tenuous link, absolutely. But Alfa Romeo has put on a pretty bold advertising campaign in the States to try to rebuild that brand name. They've introduced a couple of new cars. They're importing a few new cars into the States, and they've got a lot of advertising. A lot of the advertising that you can that you'll see during race broadcasts of both Formula One race or IndyCar. So it's a good marketing step for them because they're trying to rebuild that brand recognition in the States as a luxury brand type of car. And it kind of falls in with, the American ownership of Formula One with Liberty Media. They're trying to crack the American market there. So, I mean, it's a good move. Some people think it's silly. Some people think it's ridiculous. But, Joey, to your point, yeah, if you're going to put your engine in a Sauber, yeah, maybe let's not admit it's a Ferrari.
Well, I'll say this, is maybe you're hoping you can return those glory days with the Alpha, and maybe Charles Leclerc is your new Tazio Nuvolari to drop an old school name in there. But I think that, when you get a chance to see Sauber and the direction that they're trying to go, I mean, a year-old Ferrari engine with Pascal Wehrlein and Marcus Ericsson was still better in some respects than some of the other cars that we saw on the grid this year. I mean, they still got points. We joke a little bit about that over the course of the year, but really looking back, they did a good job, and I'm really curious to see what they do moving forward, because I'm wondering if we're going to see. They haven't officially announced Charles Leclerc as one of the drivers. I think that's coming. I think Antonio Giovinazzi, another Ferrari reserve driver, is going to be in the mix, which, by the way, I don't know if anybody here saw it on the panel, but you listening at home, if you get a chance to look up F2 highlights from the last race in Abu Dhabi, the final lap was amazing. It
was. Yeah, I watched
it came down to the final laps, and 3 guys in contention for the win, dueling it out. That's good stuff. It was good to see a season which, let's be honest, that the championship's been done for a while. It's nice to see kids like that still fighting it out, because they know that their career's still not finished. That's only one more step to try to get up to F1. So that was good to see. And then I guess to cap off the F1 conversation, what better way to cap it off than the fact that over the weekend we saw them announce and reveal a new logo, which looks like something from a 1980s arcade.
Now, as I look at that logo, and you've got to imagine it a little bit, right? You just got to sit back and let it sink in, right? If you look at the one there, it's kind of leaned back, and then the F, it kind of turns up. Looks like a pair of legs. It looks like Fernando Alonso relaxing on a lounge chair. Honest to God, it does.
Let's be honest. The big reason this happened is because they were searching. Liberty Media was searching for their own brand identity. That's a lot of what this was. There was nothing wrong with the old logo. If you ask me, the old logo looked more of what you would expect an F1 logo to look. Sharp, crisp, a little bit kind of futuristic in some respects, kind of cool and sleek. this thing, like I said, it looks like something from a 1980s arcade. I feel like we're about to play Tech Mobile or, something along those lines. Tron. I don't like it. Maybe it'll rub off on me after 5 years, but
the long and short of it, the branding, the logo has really little bearing on what's happening on the track, and people are way too upset about it's a logo. It's a logo. So what? You know what I mean? So, but Josh, I know you've been quiet. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
Very quickly, sorry. As much respect as I have for this particular person I'm going to mention in a minute, he's obviously fallen into the corporate world because Ross Brawn has turned around and said that the old F1 logo wasn't iconic or memorable.
Oh.
Yeah, sure, Ross.
Yeah, sure.
I
guess
he's not iconic or memorable either, then, huh?
No,
Ross.
Come on,
Ross Bentley. Oh, speaking of being not memorable. So anyway, Josh, you've been quiet over there. I want to kind of bring you into the conversation because you and I were talking earlier today. There's a story broke that Formula One has been looking for a second U.S. Grand Prix. And, they've talked about Vegas. The discussions about New York, New Jersey fizzled out a couple years ago. Richard and I had talked a while back, going back to Indy would be the turnkey solution. But the thing that popped up today, scouting for street race, was Miami.
Yeah, I was actually. I mean, I'm surprised, but not surprised that they take a look at Miami. I mean, I think Miami would certainly. It has some positives to it. Of Miami. For one thing, Miami's a very diverse city. So, and it's also a major central hub to get people in and out of there from virtually anywhere. I mean, it's right down on the coast of Florida. You can get people from South America, Europe, and what have you. But it's just the only thing that I caution about adding a street race, and I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but if you look through the history of racing, of when we've had street races, any city that's already a destination, I know we've talked about Vegas has come in and out the last couple of years, but any of the F1 Champ Car races in cities that are already destinations, they just don't last. Long Beach being the lone exception, just because Long Beach came at a time when racing was in its real glory years, when you had, the Niki Lauda and James Hunt rivalry, and, guys like Mario Andretti were household names, and then, it helped revitalize the city, and it's become deep and rooted in SoCal culture as well as racing. So it's just...
those guys started those races, and the other one that's lasted a long time is Toronto.
Well, yeah.
But that's right, this day and age, the legal red tape and the hoops you need to jump through to get a street race approved and the local opposition is ridiculous. See Grand Prix of Baltimore or Grand Prix of Boston for reference, or downtown Houston. I think if Formula One wants to come to the States in a second track other than Austin, it's got to be at a permanent facility. Obviously, Indianapolis is the turnkey situation. There's a couple of other great tracks in the States here, notably Road America, Watkins Glen, but they would all need a serious influx of cash to get up to what they call FIA standard. And I think probably of those, Watkins Glen is probably the closest to getting to what the FIA would need there. And they've actually, Michael Printup has had a few talks with some folks in Formula One. Don't know that that'll happen. I don't know that that's on Liberty Media's radar, but it makes more sense than doing a street race. To your point, Josh, I absolutely agree with you.
Maybe they could use the road course at Charlotte.
Oh,
well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that later tonight. Yeah.
I'll say this to Josh's point though. There's some validity to that, because when you look at tourist destinations, we don't see them thrive. Long Beach isn't really something that you've ever known as a tourist destination. People go there for the race, so it's like you need to have a situation where if you're going to go somewhere, you have to be, if you build it, they will come kind of scenario. I think, obviously Watkins Glen comes to mind. The facility's been upgraded a lot with the NASCAR situation and ISC. A lot of revamps to that facility. I think IMS makes a lot of sense. My big thing is you already go to the Gulf, around the Gulf of Mexico with going down to Austin. You're already in that area. You don't need to go 800 miles across the Gulf to be in Miami, and then you end up in Mexico City, which is another 900 miles south of Austin. I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to do that. I think attacking a place like IMS, Watkins Glen, or somewhere in the Northwest makes a lot more sense, even if it's a second race in Canada. But realistically, it's a world championship. We have one race in just about every country you could hope to have one right now. I'd say that there's some countries that don't have one that deserve one long before we get a second one here. I know the American market's important, but it's not crucial to the success of F1. And I think we, as far as Liberty Media and other things, you can't get so wrapped up into one market and trying so hard to make it thrive that you have the other one start to go downhill. I think that we also need to put a cap on how many races we're willing to put in this championship. I think it has to be 22 max, because this isn't NASCAR where we can go 36 races and we're all traveling within the United States. These teams, Richard, you were in Formula One for a period of time. I mean, it's a grueling work, and the fact that even if it's a 2-week gap between races, that's still a relatively quick turnaround for everything you'll have to do.
Yeah, I mean, most people, NASCAR are sort of limiting their sort of weekend lengths. I mean, a lot of times now the teams are, especially if you've got like an East Coast race, the teams will be leaving, in some instances, Friday morning and coming back sort of late Sunday afternoon. Formula One world, most engineers will leave on like a Wednesday and, get back from a flyaway race late on Monday. So it's probably, if you look at the actual time away from home, between F1 and NASCAR, there's not a huge amount of difference between the two series, but there's a balance there, isn't there? You've got to have the races obviously sell, but then, and I think it's where NASCAR struggles a little bit, is that it dilutes itself a little bit, and I know you get to a point in the season, or I feel you get to a point in the season in NASCAR where that's sort of like between May and August, you haven't got a clue where you are that weekend. You don't know what's going on. You don't know who's racing. It just becomes this sort of monotonous drag. And I think they need to work very hard to avoid that.
Yeah, I think that you get a chance to see the schedule firsthand, and I think it's one of those scenarios where if you really start to dig at it, they've still got to figure out things. It's nice to want things, I guess the best way to put this before I get ahead of myself. And it's nice that we hear them looking and then prospecting other places. Odds are it's just a tease. But I think that when you get a chance to look at this, they really need to figure out Silverstone and the situation with the BRDC. They've really got to figure out the future of Monza, because that's certainly that's not going to go away anytime soon. If Imola is going to happen, it needs to happen. I don't have a problem with either venue. I love Monza. I think it's beautiful, and I'm okay with Italy having 2 races in some respects just because of what it's meant to the history of the sport. But I think those things need to be figured out way before we start to test more of the waters in America. If anything else, let's see what this ESPN thing does to spark the American interest. Could they hit on something that NBC Sports Network couldn't? Because for my money, it's an end of an era for NBCSN, and that's sad because you look at what they were able to accomplish and the growth of the sport in this country, and it was really, really solid in my book. I think they had some numbers, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know that the numbers were dramatically good. But to look at some other venues, to throw one out there, if we're going to go beyond America, I'll say something that Richard was alluding to earlier, and that's Istanbul. That track facility was good. It was in a great location. And there was a lot of popularity with that venue that put on good shows. So
there's a problem with that. It's now a used car lot.
Is it really?
Pretty much. They have big. I think more from a corporate level. People will go there to buy thousands of vehicles or hundreds of vehicles, for corporate fleets rather than private individual. Yeah, but my understanding is that it's a big corporate parking lot right now.
Yeah,
Well,
But,
I saw World Superbikes race there not too long ago. Well, I guess it'd be now 2 years ago. So that's just that's stunning.
It may have been. I mean, that may have been a temporary thing. I don't know, but I did hear that was going on there in the last few years. But they certainly do need to sort of get everything, get their own house in order first before they start looking at other places. And I think you're right.
What about Germany?
Well, yeah, exactly. You've got. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the new Nürburgring. I think they just race there because of the name. I think Hockenheim. I think to a certain extent they did destroy Hockenheim when they got rid of the forest section. But I understand why they did. And the new Hockenheim is still a very, very competitive track. So when you have a 4 times champion competing in there, I think you need to go there. I mean, if you look at Germany's won 10 of the last 17 World Championships. If you look at the 5 that Schumacher won, the 4 that Vettel won, and the 1 that Rosberg won. So, and for them to not have a race, it's crazy.
And not to mention Mercedes-Benz. That's their
for sure,
home base.
And what does it say about the sport, though? And I know we can't stay on this subject forever, but what does it say about the sport when...
Oh, we can. We can.
We could. Frank would hate us, but we don't really care, Frank.
I already hate you guys, so...
But,
oh, man.
But what does it say about the sport when you see Lewis Hamilton, who's been, whether we like it or not, a champion who's transcended a lot of the sport in many different ways, a 4-time champ, British, and we're seeing issues with trying to keep racing, F1 racing, in the UK, and then you look at it a step further, we don't have a race in Germany, and you've got another 4-time champion, Sebastian Vettel, as well as the automaker Mercedes, who Lewis Hamilton drives for, and we can't put a race in Germany. And then you look at Italy having issues, and that's the home of Ferrari. It's like, what is going on here?
Well, it's like Formula One has reached out to these oil-rich countries, because
they're the only people that can afford to build tracks.
And they can afford the sanction fee.
That sanctioning fee is moving a little bit because Bernie's no longer there.
But absolutely, but that's turning your back on the history of F1 because Formula One is, traditionally European. Now we're in the Far East and the Middle East.
But I think you have to be considered a world championship.
Well, absolutely, but you can't pull all the
British
races.
F3.
You can't pull all the races
F1
out of Europe.
The thing about it is who's going to invest in building a racetrack in these times now? You've got a gleaming facility in the center of the country, in the heartland, in Indianapolis Motor Speedway, that is already up to FIA standards. It just needs someone to come in and probably promote that race properly. And I think you've got a great facility to have it. Center of the country, and then you've got another place in Texas. Texas. I honestly, other than on oil-rich country, I don't see another really new track being built in the near future. I mean, the investment.
The problem you have is that a lot of these new countries and these new tracks are being built by governments. So it's in the government interest of places like Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and Azerbaijan to attract people to the country.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Now you look at Silverstone, that's run, as we mentioned earlier, by the BRDC. It's basically a gentleman's club. So you have and some people call it a dysfunctional gentleman's club. And a British dysfunctional gentleman's club is the worst thing out there, sorry.
You're right.
Yeah, but when they're when you have the head of Liberty going to meet with the Vladimir Putin or whoever it may be, and then you've got him going to meet Ralph Billingsworth at the BRDC. Sorry, he's not who runs the BRDC. I'm trying to think of a more British name, but there's a different level of who you're dealing with, and that's one of the problems that Silverstone has had, and a lot of these other tracks in Europe have had, is they're not owned by these oil-rich governments, and they're not doing it to attract sponsorship or tourism or to promote the country. They're just doing it because that's what they do.
Yeah, and the sad part is that without Formula One, in some respects I say this, without Formula One, Silverstone never would have been able to afford the upgrades or to put in the upgrades. I know that the BRDC did that because we could attract Formula One by doing that, and it was kind of if you do it, we'll do this. And it was, kind of a trust handshake kind of a situation. But, and both didn't get what they wanted out of this deal. But I think you have to appreciate what you got, or you just got to move on. Hey, let's go somewhere else. If Silverstone doesn't want us, Silverstone isn't the only place we've ever seen F1 run in the UK. Britain's a damn good circuit.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how Liberty approach this, because I remember when Bernie was there. I mean, I had family that grew up around Silverstone. I know the area reasonably well, going back sort of 20-odd years. You had like a farm road in and out of Silverstone, was basically what it was. And back in the, mid to late 90s, Bernie was getting all, unhappy with the situation. And Bernie said, well, I'm going to make the government build new roads around Silverstone so everybody can get in and out easier. And the government turned around and said, are we? Oh, okay. Glad you've told us what we're doing. We're not doing that. So that was all privately funded by Silverstone Complex. So, part government, part private funding. But it'd be interesting to see how Liberty approach this, because they've got to innovate and develop the sport, but also they can't lose their fan base. And we've touched on this a little bit with NASCAR. The NASCAR fan base is shifting. It's getting older, and you need to attract new, younger people in. I don't think that's so much the case with Formula One. It's just disappearing because people are, not being exposed to it as much. And how Liberty go about this. And at the end of the day, we have multiple, no matter which country you're in, you have multiple 24-hour sports channels on TV now. You have to make your sport stand out and make people want to go and watch it. Now, I think, to a certain extent, Formula One actually has an advantage in the US over a lot of other sports, especially over NASCAR, because of its time slot. A lot of those European races are on at like 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, which is perfect because it's not clashing with anything else.
Right. You don't have to worry about football or anything else.
Exactly. You're like, oh, yeah, I want to watch the Grand Prix, and I want to watch an NFL game, and I want to watch baseball. Oh, well, they're all on at different times. Awesome. So they do have that. If they're looking for the US market, they have a prime slot there that they can work with to try and encourage that. And I think, I'm sure that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of these, like Singapore and Abu Dhabi, these night races out in the Far East. So it brings it into a more watchable TV slot in the US.
I think when you get a chance to look at this whole schedule, every track usually brings something unique, whether it be the environment or whether it be the racing product. And, we see it from Monaco to Spa to Suzuka. I think really when you get a chance to look at a place like Silverstone, in my opinion, I know people might disagree with me on this, but Silverstone racing is not that good. It's not. I think we come across a situation where it's like, okay, well, what can you do that's unique to help the sport? And if you can't do anything, then we need to go somewhere else. And that's, we see something unique with COTA, we see something unique with Montreal and Brazil and so on and so forth. And sure, it's a part of the history, but you know what? There's a lot of other tracks like Zandvoort that used to be part of the history of the sport too that we no longer go to. So,
but to again go back to one of the points, to slightly disagree with you there. It's about challenging the drivers and people wanting to see the drivers on the edge and the cars on the edge. You look at, corners like, the Beckett's Maggot section, the new Turn 1 and Turn 2 section. If you watch the cars through there, that is what those cars are built to do. That is what they're doing on the limit.
I don't disagree, but it's a better MotoGP track. It puts on better MotoGP races than it does Formula One races, though.
A lot of tracks do that.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying, like, I get that every track's supposed to be unique, and every track is supposed to challenge driver in some way. And I'll even throw Abu Dhabi in this gauntlet of boring races since we just talked about it. But I think that there has to be something unique that it's able to bring to the sport. And right now, I don't really see BRDC, Silverstone, etc. I don't see that happening.
So so playing devil's advocate, what does a Suzuka bring that Silverstone doesn't bring?
I think when you look at the fact that it's secluded a little bit more so than a Silverstone, it's in a totally different market. You look at what we've seen with the racing. You look at 130R. There's iconic parts of that track, and also just you see the engagements that you get from the teams and the fans, the different things going on. I mean, NBCSN was playing, culture things going on between drivers and fans. It's a different market than what they're exposed to anywhere else, and I think that that's important. That is one reason, especially now that we're no longer going to Malaysia, that makes sense. When you look at a place like Silverstone, I understand that it's still a decently far away situation from some of the other tracks down south in Spain, and now that we no longer go to Germany, but call Belgium with Spa. Obviously those things do something unique. Now we've got Austria. Austria brings something slightly unique. The racing product at those places, in my opinion, is a lot better than what we see at Silverstone the last few years. Now, if we can fix that, I'm in favor, but I think the other end of that is you have to be willing to have a fan base that can commit themselves to it. That's one reason we don't go to Germany right now. The last race we had in Germany, the grandstands looked hideous. It looked like an Xfinity race at Charlotte. It was terrible. So I think that, and people are learning where to spend their money a little bit more smartly, and I think the other end of that is also, what is Silverstone doing for the fans to help?
Let me ask you this question. Throw this question at both of you. You ever think we'll see Formula One back in South Africa?
Well, 10 years from now, maybe. Not anytime in the next 5.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some talks about, putting Kyalami back on there, but that circuit needs a lot of work.
They've done a lot of work recently.
Yeah, they would better serve an IndyCar venue than they would right now an F1 race.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I had spoken to Bobby Rahal earlier in the year, and I guess the track is owned by Porsche South Africa, and it's been brought up to modern standards. But the problem is that the track was built. I mean, it was built in the 50s, and looking at Google Earth photos of it, it's right in the middle of a neighborhood. So I mean, logistically, getting people in and out of there would be difficult. But there's ways to work around that, though.
I mean, I think you've got to look at this if you're Liberty Media, and you've got to kind of present it like a FIFA situation. I think you've got to look at it, and we see FIFA go to, whenever they're going to a place like Russia, they've got 4 or 5 or 6 stadiums, and they're having matches at each one of those stadiums at different times, and they're finding ways to plan the logistics, to plan ways for interaction, fan attendance, the draw, and how to build up different spectacles for each one of those. And I think for F1, it's kind of a similar pattern. I don't really see where that market fits with South Africa right now. I think that honestly, I don't know what you gain from that, because there's not much there, and there's not much there that you could do from a manufacturer standpoint either. I know, Josh said Porsche's part of the track. Unless Porsche becomes a part of F1 in 2021 with the engine regulations changing, I don't really see that situation playing out.
Yeah, just to sort of go back to the points about I'm going to defend it because it was my home race.
No, that's fine.
What Silverstone brings to Formula One. So I've got some numbers here from 2015, so a couple of years out of date here. But for the race weekend, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 350,000 people attended Silverstone. Now, if you take somewhere like Bahrain, they had 90,000 people. Kota had 224,000.
Don't look up Azerbaijan, because that's like 9,000, and they were.
Yeah, I mean that wasn't. But the second highest is Australia at 296,000. Canada's up at 244. Singapore 260. But I mean, I know there's the Lewis Hamilton effect, but I can't remember the last time that Silverstone wasn't sold out. You look at a lot of tracks around the world. For example, Charlotte, they're taking grandstands away. Silverstone, they can't build them fast enough.
So let me throw this at you.
You guys don't forget the first Formula One race they had at Indianapolis drew 200,000 people and was the best attended race of that year, and they continually had more than 100,000 there until the Michelin tire debacle nonsense.
So I guess I know those are a couple of years old. I feel like this past year's numbers weren't nearly as strong as that. But I'll say this:
I'd be surprised. I think they'd be pretty good.
But why in the absolute hell is the BRDC so stubborn? Because then they run into a situation where they're depriving fans. And let's be honest, I mean, these things don't end without a lawsuit coming one way or the other. So I don't understand. I don't understand BRDC's side of it in a lot of ways.
It's because they've got no money. It's basically what it is. They're, as I mentioned earlier, they're a gentleman's club, and you know, that's all. That's all they are. They don't have the money. They don't have the government backing, and they. Unfortunately, that's the situation they're in. It's a very they're fighting. I mean, I remember. Goodness me, it's a lot better than it used to be. But when I first got into motorsport and Formula One, you would go around Silverstone and the marketing and PR people would have toilet roll on them. So if their VIP wanted to use one of the bathrooms at Silverstone, they gave them toilet roll because there was no guarantee there was toilet roll in there. They had to stand outside the door because the chances are the door wouldn't lock.
But is that the Silverstone effect, or is that just how much British people love racing? And so you could put that spectacle on at another track in Britain.
Oh, yeah. Now, you could argue that, I mean, again, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the Rally of Great Britain in Wales has equally high numbers, maybe even not higher. The British Touring Car Series gets very high numbers because it's cheap and affordable and easy to access. But if you want to look at would you get the same? You know, you've got to look at the location of Silverstone. It's very much in the middle of the country. It's easy for people to get to. London, it's an hour and just over an hour north of London. From the Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds area, which is probably the second largest population density. Again, probably 2 hours south of that. Very, very easy commute and very easy to get in and out of. Brands Hatch, you'd pretty much remove the whole north of England because you couldn't get there and back in a day from anything much north of London, really. Donington Park, you can easily get in and out of Donington, but I think they've had their opportunity and they've blown that. So I think it's stuck where it is. And I think they need to. The BRDC need to sort themselves out basically, and back Silverstone and support it, and hopefully Liberty will see that as well, and they'll see. You need to get into new emerging markets for sure, but you also need to look after your core fan base and the likes of your Monzas, your Spas, your Silverstones. They're going back to France. How that will get on in Paul Ricard, we're not sure. You need to go back to Germany. You need these core tracks because that is the core heartland of the championship, and it gives the championship some identity. Going to these soulless Tilke tracks in some oil-rich country somewhere in the world doesn't engage people. It doesn't get them excited. It's just, where is this?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the Bernie Ecclestone effect, though, isn't it? Like, he would just go for whoever had the highest bid. That's why Azerbaijan got a race. They paid, reportedly, they paid 3 times the standard sanctioning fee.
And in all fairness, it's worked reasonably well. That's a good track. I mean, last year was a good race. And actually, the F2 races have probably been more entertaining than Formula 1 races. But I think there's potential there. It's it's a spectacle. It's a wow factor. Seeing these cars drive around a 2,000-year-old castle or whatever it may be is, pretty much, wow. This captures people's imagination, and that's.
Frank's cutting us off.
Yeah, I'm cutting you off. I was trying to wait for you guys to end a sentence. I would say, wow, great and passionate discussion there, but let's move on.
You don't like F1, Frank?
I love F1. But,
let's talk about going round and round in circles in NASCAR.
Yeah. Oh wait, that season's over. We can't. Sorry, Frank. No more NASCAR talk. It's over.
Poor old Seth is here for a reason. He wants to talk some NASCAR. But anyway, it kind of is a nice segue into the next little. I want to.
That's more of an interruption than a segue, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was my bad. I'm sorry. Finish your thought. Let's antagonize Frank some more. Finish your thought.
One year ago, we all made some predictions about 2017, okay? And Steve, who used to be our Formula One correspondent, made the prediction that Bernie Ecclestone will be pushed out of Formula One and Formula One would see a different direction going forward. And we've just had a great discussion about that. But I want to get into Gray had a prediction for last year, and we're going to go ahead and have a listen to it. Let's take a listen to what Gray had to say last year.
Have 3 first-time winners in the Sprint Cup division next year. I think we're going to see Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney, and Austin Dillon garner their first wins in the Cup Series next year.
Gray, you got 2 out of the 3. You predicted 3 new winners in the Cup Series. You did have 3 new winners. You got 2 of them right, but the one you missed was young Chase Elliott. But gosh, he came close, huh?
He sure did. He came close several times, and several times late in the season. But yeah, he's knocking on the door, and if he keeps doing it, he'll eventually do it. I guess the one that we didn't figure was Ricky Stenhouse, and Stenhouse got 2 plate track wins, and of course I tell you that was one of the more pleasant surprises of the year was the Roush cars and how they ran on the speedways. So that was somewhat of a nice surprise, I guess. And of course, we figured, Ryan Blaney was sort of a can't miss along the way. He ran so well in the Wood Brothers car, and he continued to run well this year, and he did get his win at Pocono.
Yeah, and then the other one, Austin Dillon. I mean, that was probably the long shot of the ones you predicted, and sure enough, he pulled off a win at the Coke 600. One of the high profile road races of the year.
Yeah, he did, and that was a nice shot in the arm for RCR, and it kind of backed up Ryan Newman's win at Phoenix a little earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so good job with your prediction there. Now, Christopher DeHarde has just joined us. Chris, how are you, buddy?
Doing well. I hope the sound isn't too muffled. I'm calling from the rear portion of a high school gymnasium now.
Okay.
What are you?
I figured I wasn't going to make it home in time, so I figured I might as well join the call right now while I'm trying to figure this out. The girls' high school basketball game I was just covering just ended about a few minutes ago, and I was just checking to make sure my box score was right.
Okay. Let's take a quick listen to Chris's bowl prediction from last year, and here it is.
I think that Toyota's going to come back from the disappointment of 2016. I think they're going to win Le Mans outright in 2017. They finished second 4 different times at Le Mans. Twice in the last 3 or 4 years, they've actually had leads evaporate from them because of technical malfunctions. I think they're going to put it all together, and in 2017, they're going to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans, especially since Audi is no longer competing at Le Mans.
Chris, you predicted that Toyota would win Le Mans outright. How'd that work out?
Not too well. Unfortunately, LMP, it almost didn't work out for anybody in LMP1 this past year, but it was definitely an odd running in more ways than one. Heck, Jackie Chan's team almost won, so it wasn't. It was one that will be remembered for years to come.
But yeah, Porsche won. Toyota finished 8th. As many times as Toyota's been at Le Mans, and many times they've had good cars there, they just haven't been able to pull off that win at Le Mans. Heck, even Mazda's won Le Mans.
Mazda really refined their car over the course of a few years. Toyota really kind of messed themselves up by not running a third car, and it really showed.
All right, now we're going to go ahead and the last little tape of a prediction I have is mine. We'll go ahead and have a listen to it. This is what I had to say last year. Takuma Sato wins the Indy 500 in the Andretti car. And there you go. That was a pretty good one. Takuma Sato wins the Indy 500. He did that. Now, in retrospect, then he made, in what my mind was one of the biggest knee-jerk decisions to sign with Rahal for the next year, when Andretti was speculating, there was speculation that Andretti was going to go to Chevrolet, and and it turns out Andretti stayed with Honda. So, Joey, now you're pretty involved in IndyCar, and Josh, you could chime in as well. I mean, Sada was welcome to stay at Andretti. Do you think him and his agents just jumped the gun there, or is he being pushed out the door? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to that question. I think, first and foremost, I'm happy Takuma Sato won. He was the driver journalist for us at Motorsports Tribune, so that made for a really cool retrospective article.
Absolutely.
Gonna plug that one in there right quick. But I think that when you get a chance to see this, Andretti, you understand why they were contemplating it with the Universal Aero Kit and everything coming out. They did make their decision a little later than anyone would have liked, really. And I think that Takuma just couldn't wait. So he goes back to where it all began at RLL. And I think that it's unique because we get to see Graham have a teammate finally for a whole season, not just tag for 3 races during the year. And I think that that element played a factor. It also hurt Andretti, though, beyond losing somebody like Takuma. Talking to Michael Andretti a couple weeks ago, one of the things that he said was like, we haven't been a part of these manufacturer tests for Honda. They've got Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports and Chip Ganassi Racing involved, and that's a lot to do with the fact that they were so late in making their answer for declaring for next year to stay with Honda. So, it hurt them in that respect. They haven't been able to touch the cars. They haven't had a driver able to touch the car. And it's a kind of a double negative from that respect. You lose Takuma, defending Indy 500 champion. You lose your opportunity to get your hands on the car early. Even though they have an engineer present, let's be honest, there's nothing like having the feedback directly from the driver and it being your driver involved, so you can kind of relay that to what you need to set up things for your organization moving ahead. Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit of a jump in the gun, but I don't think that Takuma's going to be hurting at all. I think Honda, if you really look at, we expect improvement from both sides, from engine manufacturer Chevy and Honda. But I think when you really look ahead, if you could base it off of this year alone and say, okay, if we have a universal aero kit, what are we going to do? The more powerful engine is the Honda engine. It is more susceptible to engine failures because of that power, but I think it's a no-brainer. I think the big thing in question is, can Michael Andretti become the 3rd car owner in the history of the Indy 500 to go 3 consecutive victories? Lou Moore did it back in the 40s, and Roger Penske did it in the early 2000s with Gilles de Ferran and Elio Castroneves. Can he be the 3rd one to do it? And I think that would be a really cool story in its own right, especially when you look at the fact that we're entering a new IndyCar era. It's going to be so tough to do it next year because we know, regardless of it being an even playing field, there's no discount for resources, and those are the benefits of being at a place like Team Penske. They haven't won one in a while, and I'd probably put them as the early favorites if I'm a betting man on anybody, especially when the playing field's level. But yeah, that being said, I know a little off topic like usual on the Takuma thing. I think he's going to be fine at RLL.
I think it'll be fun. I think that'll benefit the team as a whole. Number one, Graham has been wanting a teammate for the full season, and Bobby also has been wanting to run a 2-car team. Takuma brings a little bit of funding from both Panasonic, and there's a little bit of Honda money that comes with Takuma. And I think that, the Rahal team has been one of the top Honda teams, on a smaller scale where Rahal has been able to jump in there and win races. He swept Detroit last year. 2 years ago, contended for the championship. He was there right up to the last race. So I think overall it strengthens the Rahal team. But I think Takuma, in retrospect, had he known that Michael was going to stay with Honda, and he didn't know, maybe he's thinking, oops. But we'll see how it works out for him.
I'll say this, though. If you could do something unique this year or entering 2018, I think that this is the perfect thing for RLL. I think Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan, you've got a driver in Graham Rahal who can win races, who is starting to really hit his stride consistently year in and year out after many years of being questioned about different things. I think that when you get a chance to see him starting to enter the prime of his career, the more resources you can add to that team to help level them and get them up. We're in for a very unique season next year. Schmidt-Peterson's going to be improved. A lot of teams are going to be improved. You don't really look at this and expect anyone to really take a back seat. Bourdais back, hopefully for a full season, barring any weird injuries, crashes like what happened at Indy last year. Going back, since we're reviewing a few things, if you could look at the whole season and look at that one moment, if that one moment doesn't happen to Bourdais, he's challenging for the championship, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Dale Coyne Racing would have been in championship contention for this title, going head-to-head with Joseph Newgarden and company. And I think that, I'm really excited to see what's going to happen entering next year. There's still maybe a few things to play out with, potentially Harding Racing being full-time next year. That's what's been kind of on the cards for a while. And you also look at Carlin making some moves maybe quietly behind the scenes. They're getting ready to possibly go full season next year. Maybe a 2-car effort with Kimball and Max Chilton is what's been largely talked about. And move this to Harding a little bit more. The announcement today that Brian Barnhart, race control of IndyCar, being revealed as now the president at Harding Racing. So he takes a step away from the series role that he's known for a very long, long time, and now he moves over back into a team role, which he hasn't, I don't believe he's been at for 20, 25 years. So you got to go back.
Been a minute.
Al Unser Jr. days. So
and Al Unser Jr. is there, right there working for Harding Racing as well.
Yeah, so, he's kind of the driver coach, if you will.
Coach, yep.
Of Gabby Chavez, who's a damn good shoe. And you got Larry Curry, very well respected team manager over there. And then you got his son, Mike, who's on the pit box, former Indy 500 winner. So they may be a new team. They did good in 3 starts last year. I know the result at Pocono wasn't what they were wanting. The qualifying effort was certainly there. But a top 10 in their debut at Indy, a 5th place at Texas, they're going to be one to watch entering next season. But we'll save that thing for the preview entering next year. But a lot of good things. A lot of good things to like going into next year.
Let me pose a question.
Now. Well, Gray, I wanted to let Josh jump in. He had a comment here.
Well, I wanted to throw my hat in the ring with the whole Takuma. I mean, I think Takuma fits the mold for a second driver at RLL. I mean, I know that Graham was very praising of Oriol Servia for a long time, and and Servia's. I mean, I would say Servia's good for supporting a second team effort. I mean, him and Graham were good teammates at Newman Haas. They both got that same education, but it's just Oriol. I mean, I love the guy to death. It's just he hasn't. Unfortunately, he's had a lot of bad luck with the team, with losing rides in recent years, not of his own doing. But Oriol could contend for a championship. But I think Takuma. I think Takuma exercised a lot of demons by winning Indy last year. I mean, easily those last 10 laps of Indy were probably the best 10 laps of his life. And and we saw throughout the year, we didn't see as many of the cataclysmic mistakes consistently. He seemed to be
Texas.
Well, yeah. I would say Texas probably would be the only one. I mean, he was more let down. He was more let down by his car having issues than anything else. So I think having the bolstered two car lineup at RLL. I think that's going to be a good pairing.
Absolutely. Now, Gray, you want to throw something out?
Yeah, we're talking about some new teams coming in there, and I wanted to ask Joey, how many cars entries you think we'll have at Indy this year?
35. 35. Yeah, I think we're going to have a good bump day. There was some number that was given that we already are at 25. Mm-hmm. And that's without the confirmation of Harding Racing. That's without the confirmation of Carlin or some of the extra one-offs that we see whenever teams move to an extra ride. So I think we're going to end up right at 35, which is really going to stretch the limit of the engine manufacturers because there's only so many engines to go around. Mm-hmm. But it's been a minute since we've had a natural bump day, and I think we're really going to get one.
Yeah, I was hoping we would this year. It sounds like there's going to be a lot more interest this year, too.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So, with that being said, we're hour and 20 minutes into our show here. I want to get into the last bit just for fun. I've got a little grab bag of topics here that was pull them out of the bag and or actually it's a Tupperware, not a bag or a hat.
Thank you.
but I've actually pre-selected the first topic, and I'm going to throw it to you, Richard, since you had to question me on the hat thing. But the first topic is undoubtedly probably the biggest motorsport story of last year, and that would be Alonso.
Yeah, I mean, it was brilliant, wasn't it? I mean, it got people excited again about, Indy 500 from the European side, and I think it increased the popularity and the interest, at least in Formula One, a little bit from some of the US markets. And I mean, I think it said a lot about the situation when there was more people watching Alonso's practice day at Indy than they watched the Phoenix race, which I think said everything you need to know on that level. And also, it was quite telling. I don't know if it was Sky TV or just the general international feed for the Formula One race. A lot of the McLaren personnel were asked what their highlight of the Formula One season was in 2017. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, I think, with the given the Honda scenario. But Alonso's answer was the Indy 500, which tells you everything you need to know about what he thought of the whole month. And he said he enjoyed being competitive, and it's a shame we're not going to see him back there this year. But I think he'll have a real chance at Monaco, which is, in all fairness, where he belongs at the moment. But it sort of lent his hand to him taking part in Le Mans, and I believe he's doing the Daytona race in January. I believe Lance
for United
Stroll,
Autosport.
Yep, which is Zach Brown's team, I believe, isn't it? He's also involved with, because he's the senior guy at McLaren now. But I believe also we're seeing Lance Stroll take part in Daytona as well, I believe. But I think it's good. This hopefully is like the start of seeing Formula One drivers do what they do best. These guys are race drivers, and we want to see them in cars. We want to see them out there racing. Not just Formula One cars. It's great to see them in different environments and different scenarios. So hopefully we're going to see a little bit more of that. And I'm sure Liberty love the concept of that, getting a bit more airtime, if you like, for some of their drivers in different environments and dragging people in from different sports to watch.
I think the can I go ahead, Frank?
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah. I think overall, driving the interest is that's one interesting thing to note about Fernando running Indy. But overall, I think it's just Fernando is the true he's got the same characteristics of a Jimmy Clark or a Graham Hill. It's just the dude just loves racing, and him running the Indy 500. It wasn't about trying to save the Indy 500 or bring more interest in. That the interest will come, sure, but overall it was just Fernando wanted to make a personal journey, and as we saw during the race, had his engine not blown, he could have. I think he could have been right up there with Takuma. And the night before the race, the Vegas odds on him were 6-1.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I think that the bigger thing with Alonso is the fact that he wants to do this Triple Crown thing. For so many years, you've got Formula One drivers who specialize in Formula One, IndyCar drivers stay in Indy cars, NASCAR drivers stay in the ovals. You've got the occasional crossover guy, say a Kurt Busch or a John Andretti or a Tony Stewart that wants to try both. But when was the last time we had an active Formula One driver over here doing Indy or doing the Daytona 24, So I think it opens the gates. And it also shows his frustration with his current team, that he's just feeling very stagnant there. You figure, out of 10 manufacturers, the only people that McLaren beat was Sauber. They finished ninth in the thing, so he wants to be in a competitive seat. and his decision to stay with McLaren next year. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think you look at the numbers. There was a lot of numbers being touted around on the engine side of things. Obviously, Mercedes is still the top performing engine, but a lot of these teams do quite in depth performance analysis now. And the Ferrari engine was like 3% down on Mercedes, and Renault about 6% down on Mercedes, and the Honda power unit was like 11% down on the Mercedes. So there's a big gap there, and to a certain extent, that transition to Renault is pretty much, I wouldn't say free performance, but it's a guaranteed step up from where they are. And to a certain extent, McLaren are going to, make themselves sound good, but they're saying from an aerodynamics perspective, they believe their aerodynamic efficiency is up there with the Red Bull car, which is very believable. I mean, you look at the lead aerodynamicist at McLaren is a former Red Bull aerodynamicist there, so you can quite easily see that there's a lot of similarities between those two vehicles and those two configurations. So they're going to be there or thereabouts, and I think Alonso probably. Now, you can say as much as you like about how good Alonso is as a driver, but I think most people would admit he hasn't always made the best career decisions in terms of where and when he makes a move. Hopefully, you'll finally get one right and stick with the team, and they will be competitive. Yeah, I mean, partly there was no other options really available to him. I think the only other realistic opportunity for him was probably to go to IndyCar, and I think he's still got some unfinished business in F1 before he makes that transition. I think he'll probably have another couple more years, maybe 3 years in F1, and I think you will see him make that transition to IndyCar. That'll be interesting. But I think he's probably made the right decision of sticking where he is. Whether McLaren will be championship winning, probably not, but race winning, I think they've got a very good chance next year, yeah.
All right, so Fernando Alonso trying to do everything back with McLaren. I mean, this guy, he's, there have been two guys win 4 championships apiece since he's won his last one, and even Lewis Hamilton said Alonso was driving better than he ever has. If he was in a top car, it'd be awesome to see. So, but anyway. Well,
we mentioned earlier, Van Dorn did have an opportunity to pass him in the standings going into Abu Dhabi. I mean, Alonso, in all fairness, has some pretty good PR people. He does people do believe what he says, because in all fairness, there's no real mark for where he is. You know, he can say he's driving fantastically, but the car's terrible. Who are we to doubt that? You know, we don't have a mark. We don't have a sort of stake in the ground to compare that against. So, you know, that's not to say he isn't driving fantastically. But he does like to, you know, big himself up, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, so, listen, I'm going to pull something out of this little Tupperware I have here, okay?
It's not a sandwich, is it?
Huh? No, it's
not a sandwich.
It's actually the name of a driver. I'm going to throw this one to Seth, because Seth has been sitting over here quiet and patient, and the name on this little piece of paper is William Byron.
Well, William Byron, he pretty much lit the Xfinity Series on fire this year. Let's see, 4 wins. He made the playoffs as a rookie. He won the championship as a rookie. Second rookie to ever win the NASCAR Xfinity Series championship. The first one was Chase Elliott in 2014. He's going to be moving up to the Cup Series with Hendrick Motorsports taking over the number 24. I mean, what can you say about him that hasn't already been said? He won Rookie of the Year. The only thing he didn't win was Most Popular Driver. That went to Elliott Sadler, his teammate. I mean, the kid came from iRacing. The kid came from short tracks. He only started racing when he...
Nice.
But he only started racing when he was 14 years old. And he's 19 now? 20? So in 6 years, he's gone from the lowest level there is to the top level. I don't know if anyone has moved up that quickly.
So,
and
Seth,
he is very talented.
do you think he's getting pushed in a Cup car too quickly? Because I know that was a concern of a certain Mr. Dale Earnhardt Jr., who said that he needed another year in Xfinity, or another 2 years in Xfinity before he could move up to Cup. And now he's going to be thrust into that role. I mean, do you think he's going to excel? Do you think it's fair to him? But yeah, obviously, if you look at who he's up against, there's a bunch of other young guys getting pushed right in there too.
That, and also, he has a little bit of an advantage with the car, at least for the Chevys, because they're switching to the Camaro ZL1. No other driver in a Chevrolet has driven that in the Cup Series. So, in that sense, he's on a level playing field to a certain degree with other Chevy drivers. Otherwise, is he being moved up too quickly? Probably, but at the same time, just about everyone's being moved up quicker than we've seen in years. So, I mean, Eric Jones got moved up quickly, Daniel Suarez, Chase Elliott, the list goes on and on. One of the biggest examples is Joey Logano, and he struggled for the first 3 or 4 years until he switched to Team Penske. So, as far as whether or not he'll struggle, I think he'll struggle the first third half of the season. But I think towards the end of the season, he'll probably be running up front.
All right, well, we hope to see that. So, Gray, you have any thoughts on young William Byron?
I'm not sold on him yet. I think he's been in very good equipment from the top. He hasn't. I still think he hasn't. You know, for lack of a better term, he hadn't paid his dues, and I think that's going to become more evident in the Cup Series. Big jump between the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series, and that jump has gotten, to me, to be the divide is a lot larger. There's a long way between the Cup garage and the Xfinity garage, and I think we're going to see some growing pains. He's going to be in good equipment. He's going to show some flashes from time to time, but I think the grind of the Cup Series. And the length of the races is a big difference when you used to running 200-mile races and then all of a sudden running 400 and 500-mile races week in and week out. So I think his learning curve is going to be going to get a little bit more steeper, and we're going to see some peaks and valleys in his season next year.
Now, Joey, I see you've typed something in the chat here that you're saying that Daniel Hemrick is greater than young Mr. Byron. So I'd be interested to hear your thought there.
I actually didn't think that was going to happen on the air. I just think, kind of to Gray's point, I look at somebody like Daniel Hemrick who has paid his dues. He's in his mid-20s. He's not always been in the best equipment. We've seen him race short tracks all over the place. And I think that if you had somebody like Daniel Hemrick, who is a little bit more seasoned, who understands the ins and outs of racing, who has gone up against the struggle and come out on the better side of it, you put him in that kind of equipment, and I think Daniel Hemrick is going to be winning a hell of a lot more races than William Byron. I think Byron's a good talent, and I think over the long haul, he might be the smart money. But this feels the same way that a Kyle Busch situation felt at Hendrick. I look at somebody that they really let go of, and that was Landon Gassel. That when the economy fell and he lost the General Motors backing in that situation, that was really somebody that NASCAR lost out on to put in a top ride, because he's also another talent who's unique, who has a unique fan base, is fun on social media and does those things, and damn good race car driver, takes care of equipment. I don't necessarily know that Byron has paid his dues the same way that those other guys have. And at the time, Landon didn't either, but he's paid his dues since. So that's just kind of my point on that, is I feel like I need a driver that has more seasoning. I'm tired of seeing these 19 and 20-year-olds in rides. I want to see these guys that are 25, 26, 27 like it used to be. Those days are gone. Don't get me wrong, I know that, but I want to see guys who have gone up against and actually struggled and come out ahead.
Just a little side note on William Byron and Daniel Hemrick. The first super late model that William Byron drove was owned by Daniel Hemrick, and he finished, I want to say, in the top 5 in that race. He beat a few regulars that run super late models, and also his future teammate Chase Elliott in that. But
yeah, they used to run legend races against each other over there in Charlotte, too, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And Hemrick had records that stood until this year. He still has 2 records, I want to say, all-time wins, and I think there's one other, I think most races run in a row or something like that.
All right, good discussion about that. Let's. I'm going to pick another thing out of the hat here and throw it to... I'm going to throw this one to you, Josh. The name in here is, and Joey, you can jump in too. The name in here is Ed Jones.
Well, he was a very. I mean, I would say he was a very welcome surprise. I would say that just by how well he ran at Indy, and how, just in that whole situation. I mean, he essentially had to become the team lead after Bourdais crashed and they lost their primary driver. He qualified the car in the top 10, and then he went straight to the front. And his track record in Indy Lights on ovals has always been really good, despite not winning a race. I mean, he lost a race by about 4 or 5 inches last year in the Freedom 100. But I mean, overall, I think Ed laid down his mark the second coin car has normally gone to a ride buyer, but as we saw how Dale Coyne Racing has improved their engineering staff by tenfold, and for Dale to do that has been awesome. But now, after winning Rookie of the Year, he's gone. Now he's the number two man at Ganassi. So I think the pairing of him and Dixon, I mean, they're somewhat similar in personalities. They're both very calm and reserved. Both in and out of the cockpit. But I mean, I think I think Ed Jones was a very good welcome surprise this year.
Yeah, I mean, his story is one of the more unique ones, because I remember covering the Indy Lights season finale in Laguna Seca a couple of years ago, and he won the championship when a teammate kind of came in there and gave him that position with 2 laps left to beat Santiago Urrutia by a single point. And I think that since then we've seen Santi. He had to run another year in Indy Lights, and now he says he's got the money to go to IndyCar, but we still haven't heard anything. Meanwhile, Ed Jones has just gone on to do Ed Jones things, and that's run consistent and in some ways run better than we expected. Like, not a lot of people expected him to go in and do what he did in Indianapolis. That's obviously the highlight. But I think when you look at what he was able to accomplish when Sebastian Bourdais was gone with that injury, and take over as kind of the leader of that team amid driver chaos, not knowing who's going to rotate in. This week it's James Davison, the next week it's Tristan Vautier. Not knowing who his teammate's going to be, yet we're still seeing Dale Coyne Racing further themselves in the program and still be just as fast. I think it says a lot about his character. I think it says a lot about his ability and to work with engineers, his feedback. And I mean, Josh pointed out that he's the number 2 man at Ganassi. Yeah, they've trimmed down to 2 cars. Yes, he's the number 2 man among 2 guys, but that's a pretty damn good place to be in, especially when you look at what they're trying to build at Ganassi, because they stretch themselves too thin. Maybe got too much information with too few engineering and too many people wearing too many hats at the same time. Now they're kind of accordioning everything back together. I think it's a smart move, going down to 2 cars, especially when you're trying to move the whole program forward, because you can't just base everything anymore around Scott Dixon. He's got many years left, but it certainly wouldn't hurt if you kind of got back into the years of having Jimmy Vasser and Alex Zanardi, where they were just ridiculously dominant. And that was a good time in racing.
Or even if you go back to the years when they had Dario and Scott. I mean, ever since Dario left the sport, Ganassi's been built around Scott Dixon. And even, Tony Kanaan coming in, it really didn't make an impact in the number 2 car. So if they can have a solid 2-car team with both guys on equal footing, where Ed has an equal chance to win a race with Scott, it's good for the sport.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing here is making sure that the layoffs that they had at Ganassi, we've seen a lot of those guys go on to Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports and other places over the offseason. So I guess my biggest question isn't even around Ed Jones right now. It's did CGR keep the right people to build this program forward? Because we know that, yes, driver feedback is incredibly crucial. I know that Ed is the right person to have in there along with Scott, but who else do they have to coordinate with them? So that being said, excited about that. Ed Jones, hell of a season, should have won. I understand the Fernando Alonso mania. Ed Jones should have been, if nothing else, co-rookie of the year for the Indy 500 this year, to finish third without a nose cone, to have some of the performances he did, race that Dale Coyne car above and beyond, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then was hotly debated in the early part of June. So, but next topic I have in here, I'm gonna throw this one at Gray, and the name I have in here is Furniture Row Racing.
Wow. Yeah. Well, they came on the scene full time in 2010, and of course they had their growing pains, and up until that they got a big win with Reagan Smith at Darlington, winning the Southern 500, and they had some success for a single car team. Then they became an alliance team with Richard Childress Racing, and strengthened throughout that arrangement. And then came the Toyota deal that they were able to broker and get involved with Joe Gibbs Racing, and that really opened that was a springboard to their success. Last year they had a dominant car in many races. Didn't win as many as they probably should have. It seems like bad luck would always befall the team, but they led a lot of laps and ran very strong, and that was just sort of a precursor to what we saw this year. And he dominated the circuit, and laps led, and races won, and prevailed and won the championship. So it's been a fun rise, to watch that team come along. They do it a little bit different than the mainstream NASCAR teams do. They're located in Denver, Colorado, far away from the hotbed of the sport in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. So they've kind of done things their own way, and I think the emergence of Furniture Row has really, to me, has been a breath of fresh air in our sport.
Yeah, I think that,
and
sorry, Seth. I think personally, I think it's short-lived. But before that, thinking all that stuff, I'll ask this, Gray. The only reason I interrupted you, Seth, I promise. What do you think the impact of this is, having Barney Visser be the first car owner not named Joe Gibbs or Hendrick or Penske to win a championship in recent memory?
I think it's a good thing in that it shows the sport to be just a little bit more diverse. I think on that hand, I mean, as far as a different owner, but you got to look a little bit deeper into it and their affiliation with Toyota and their affiliation with Joe Gibbs. So in some regards, it's somewhat of a satellite operation into the fact that they get some chassis and some technical support from Joe Gibbs. But there again, I can tell you from experience with Furniture Row when they were an alliance team with RCR. There's some smart guys at that thing, and they went about their business doing things their way, and we benefited as much from that alliance, with information coming from them as information coming from us back and forth. It was it was very much reciprocal, but we got a lot of benefit from our association with Furniture Road. And I had that same discussion with some guys from Joe Gibbs early on when they first teamed up, because Joe Gibbs, having a 4-car operation, some of those guys were a little bit concerned about stretching some of their resources a little thin, and if it would diminish their effort. And I told them that Furniture Row would bring a lot to that table, and they would actually help that whole Toyota equation, and I think it did. Throwing the 78 team in with the 4 Gibbs Toyotas strengthened their posture in the sport.
And not only did they win the championship this year, they also won Rookie of the Year this year with Eric Jones.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that was a brand new team, the 77, which unfortunately due to sponsorship is not going to be around next year. But Furniture Row isn't releasing anybody. They're just reorganizing where those employees are. On top of that, Martin Truex Jr. and Sherry Pollux, it's been well documented everything they've gone through this year. They were honored today with the Myers Brothers Award for their charitable work fighting cancer. Or fighting juvenile cancer, I should say. So you have a lot of different things between all of their bad luck, all of their good luck, and everything, and just how different of a team they are.
Man, all good stuff. All good stuff there. Now,
can I just very quickly? I did want to make a point very, very quickly. You actually touched on it a little bit there. Obviously, the 77 team disbanding there. It does sort of highlight a little bit how or where the sport is when you have a teammate to, the championship-winning car not being able to find sponsorship for 2018. I'm sure they could have found a competent driver to fill that seat at worst. So it does sort of highlight some of the struggles that if they can't find sponsors, then what chance do the rest of the field have?
Yeah, and you got to look at the fact that Monster Energy is not yet committed to 2019, and the IndyCar Series is looking at life beyond Verizon after 2018. So, if the series can't find a sponsor, it bodes bad for the guys in the sport. And on the side in Formula One, Santander, it's a global banking corporation that's backed Ferrari to the tune of 250 million pounds a year, is exiting for there to sponsor the UFEA soccer. Or, as you call it, Richard, football.
The Champions League, yes.
Yes. Yep, that's where they're putting their money.
It's pronounced UEFA.
I think UEFA, yeah. I think UEFA is the word you're looking for there.
Silly American.
Silly Americans.
Should we do a football show during the off season?
Yeah. You and Joey could do one all on your own.
Cool.
So, Richard, this next name I pulled out of my little Tupperware is for you. And that is Carlos Sainz.
Junior or senior?
Junior.
Okay, just checking. He sort of escaped the Red Bull sort of grasp a little bit. I believe he's on loan, isn't he, with Renault? But you could quite easily see that transition becoming a permanent one. Almost got a little bit unlucky, I think, when Max Verstappen got sort of promoted ahead of him to the Red Bull senior team, because apart from the hype and apart from Josh Verstappen, I don't really see there was much that Max did better than Carlos Sainz, really.
It's the William Byron effect.
Yeah, exactly. But I think he's a fantastic, phenomenal driver, and he's sort of been taken under the wing a little bit over the last few years by Fernando Alonso, and they've grown up, or he's grown up with Alonso sort of mentoring him, for want of a better word. And he didn't go the typical route of the as it was in the GP2 or the F2 route. I believe he went through Formula Renault 3.5, which is a great series. Has produced some fantastic drivers through there. And I believe Max Verstappen went the same route as well a little bit. So they I feel sorry for him in a way that he has been overshadowed by Max, but hopefully being in the Renault car, and I think doing these like last 3 or 4 races this year for Renault will help him massively next year. But turn up in Melbourne and know what's happening. He's not sort of going into it fresh. He knows what to expect there, and he'll hopefully have a decent start there. And up against Hülkenberg, Hülkenberg's a pretty damn good benchmark, really. If you can go out there and you can give Hülkenberg a run for his money, then you're doing something right. So Carlos Sainz Jr., if he's one of those drivers that, if he gets the right car at the right time, can undoubtedly become a champion. Whether he has the personality to create that opportunity, as I say, like a Lewis Hamilton has done, like Max Verstappen and Sebastian Vettel have done, they've created that opportunity by the way they carry themselves. I don't think Carlos Sainz is quite such a supporter of his own ability in the public eye, for want of a better word. So, maybe he's going to have to work a little bit harder for it. But I think if an opportunity does come along, I think he will be extremely competitive, and hopefully he will take the opportunity, because I think he has a huge amount of potential.
I think that the only way that Carlos Sainz goes back to Red Bull is if Daniel Ricciardo leaves. There's no other way that I see Sainz going back, unless it's.
But then you look at where does that leave Pierre Gasly and guys like that? That is what we've discussed this on the show many, many times. The benefits and the hindrances of that Red Bull Junior category.
I think that there's something to be said about a Spaniard in a Renault car doing really well. I mean, we saw Fernando Alonso do really well, and let's not forget that you talk about carrying themselves really well. Maybe this is a Spaniard thing, because we remember Fernando Alonso, people forget, he raced for a year, and then he sat for a year, and then he came back for the full year. He was a test driver for one season of his whole career. Yeah. So for Carlos Sainz, I think it's a matter of that personality being gravitated towards his ability and what we see on track. The camera doesn't go to him. Usually it only follows Vettel and it only follows Hamilton, and it doesn't even follow Bottas as much as it follows some of the other guys like Ricciardo, who obviously Ricciardo's awesome for the camera and awesome for the public and stuff like that. But I think that without a doubt, Sainz is world champion material, and I think that he is the perfect fit to. Him and Hulk together can boost Renault's program up out of where they are, and I could see them threatening Red Bull Racing next season for third overall within the Constructors' Championship. They're that good. And
you hear some of the murmurings coming out of Toro Rosso towards the end of the year about the Renault engine package that they've been providing. It'll be I'm sure Christian Horner has got his excuses already very well prepared for that scenario next year, because I can easily see that happening. They've always been a good team. Going back in the years, goodness me, back in the early 80s, out of that facility at Enston in Oxfordshire, that was the Tolman team. Then it became Benetton. Then it was Renault. Then sort of Lotus, or whoever it was. It wasn't really Lotus, but somebody that decided to use the name Lotus decided to try and destroy that organisation. And Renault, in all fairness to them, they've got to give Renault a lot of credit there. I wouldn't say reluctantly, but you can never imagine that they really wanted to get back into it. Maybe they had a little bit of a sort of nostalgic concept about a lot of the people that were still there were based around that old Renault team. So they went in there and they've gone and restructured that team, and they're recruiting it from an engineering standpoint at quite a frenetic rate. And you really do hope that they can get back there. I mean, it's great for Formula One, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about, Renault, a resurgence of Renault, the resurgence of McLaren. You've got, Red Bull are going to be up there. Mercedes are going to be up there. Ferrari are going to be up there. There could be 4, 5, 6 manufacturers. You could have a leading manufacturer not getting in the points next year because the competition is going to be so tight. It can be fantastic.
I tell you,
certainly can be fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
But I got one last point for you, Frank.
Go ahead.
We talked a little bit about Britain drivers and Silverstone and Germany and Vettel and things of that sort. I think what's key when I look at this situation, you've got a French manufacturer in Renault. There's the potential for 4, maybe 5 guys from France or nearby, like Monaco with Charles Leclerc, that could be on the grid next year. Grosjean says he's from France, even though he was born in Switzerland, but he takes under the French flag. Lots of guys are like that. And we're returning to France at Paul Ricard next year. I think that they are in a prime situation as a country. We see them, they are whooping everybody's tail in WRC. And obviously we got Pagano and Bourdais and IndyCar. I think we can finally say that we thought we had somebody really special in Jules Bianchi before the unfortunate happened in F1. I think it's safe to say, though, that little mark that was in F1, we can kind of look ahead more positively now on France's presence in Formula One, because they are definitely doing some good things.
I'll tell you what, when I first started watching Formula One, there was this big push from both, led by Renault, to get some French drivers into Formula One, and also backed by Gitans, the cigarette factory that was with the Ligier team. And they pushed all these really good names into F1. You're talking Jean-Pierre Jabouille, Depailler, Jacques Lafitte, Alain Prost, René Arnoux, and you had a big influx of French guys in the sport there in the late 70s and early 80s, and all these guys were good, and they finally got their first French champion in Prost, although he won it with McLaren and not with Renault. But it's nice to see resurgence of Renault. It's nice to see those old yellow and black colors back on the car. So we wish Carlos Sainz the best and Renault team. Although why Renault need to be successful with a Spaniard, not a French guy, I don't know. So, but I'm going to go ahead and look at this thing again. I've got one I'm going to throw this one at Chris. Okay. AJ Foyt Motorsports.
Wow, that's kind of a wild card. The beginning of the season was definitely not up to what AJ is hoping for. They obviously had a massive amount of change this year with having one car in Indiana and one car in Texas. They had to split the shop duties up, of course, which isn't always an easy thing to do in a series like this, like IndyCar. And Connor Daly did a good job later on in the year with scoring a 5th place at Gateway. He did a fantastic job. And for me, it showed that the chemistry that his team was building in Indianapolis was working, and it was starting to produce results. Unfortunately, it took him a bit of a while to get there. I think the team made a good move signing Tony Kanaan. I think that he'll help that program out, and having his chief engineer join the team from Ganassi is going to be a great addition to the team as well. However, I'm still not 100% sold on the addition of Matthias Leist to the program, because I believe that he was not completely consistent this past year in Indy Lights and would benefit from having another year in Indy Lights. I think that Connor Daly should have gotten that seat alongside Tony Kanaan, and it could have helped out the team a bunch, especially considering, where Connor Daly came from.
Now, speaking of Connor Daly, right?
Right.
Speaking of Connor Daly, he still haven't signed a contract for next year. Alexander Rossi is telling him the rent is due. One of the few seats remaining left is the number 20 car to do the road courses alongside Ed Carpenter running the ovals. Do you think that's a possible landing spot for Connor Daly, or do you think that's that ship has sailed and that's going to go to somebody that can write a check?
I think Connor Daly has a few options available to him, and he just has to go through the pros and cons of each one. Sure, Ed Carpenter Racing, he can run the 20 car on those road and street courses. Spencer Piggott did a decent enough job with that car last year, but you'll still miss out on a good portion of the season, including the Indy 500, unless you can find another rider, unless Carpenter can get a third car going for that one. The Oakland Racing so far has only one driver signed with Bourdais. I don't think they've signed the second driver. Again, unless I might have missed something in the last few weeks, I don't know.
No, nothing solid there. I mean, R.C. Enerson has come up in conversation, as has Gutierrez. But no, nothing. I think Dale Coyne this year is going to be, it's going to be week before we get to the season opener that we see who the second car is.
Like usual. Then we have, there's a bunch of different other options out there. I mean, we know that Harding Racing is looking at running Gabby Chavez full time, but I think, unless my memory serves me right, Mike Harding was talking about trying to run a second car. If he can run a second car part time, when you have Alan Jr. and Matt Curry and Larry Curry on the same team, a part time ride with them might be a good, decent opportunity for Connor. He doesn't have to worry about having decades worth of entrenched people there trying to, work their own agenda instead of working at making the cars as quick as possible.
All right, well, we'll have to see what happens with Connor, and we'll have to see what happens with A.J. Foyt. So this next little topic I picked out of the bag here is, I'm going to throw this one to Seth. Danica Patrick.
Well, let's see. It was her last season. She didn't make a lot of noise in her NASCAR career. She won the pole in the 2013 Daytona 500. She scored a handful of top tens. She's going to run the Daytona 500 next year and the Indy 500 next year.
So let's dig into that. So she would like to run the Daytona 500 and the Indy 500.
Yeah.
Right? She has nothing signed, but realistically, right, she's number one, a publicity machine. Number two, she's on her farewell tour. Number three, she's Danica Patrick, and she could probably find a high-profile sponsor willing to write a check that's acceptable to, say, a Chip Ganassi to fund this. I mean, do you think this is possible, or is she grasping at straws? Because everybody has wished her well, but nobody's given her a ride.
I think it's possible. More so that's plausible. I don't know if it's actually going to happen. Most people would like to see it happen just because of the publicity and the people it would draw in to watch the races. But, I mean, other than Ganassi, I don't see many, at least in NASCAR, that could put out an extra car. You have Team Penske, you have Furniture Row. Other than those two, there aren't many that have the capacity or the amount of room with the charter system and having the limit on 4 teams max or 4 charters per owner max. So that only leaves so many spots. In IndyCar, again, from what I've read and what I've heard, Ganassi is the most likely option. Whether or not that happens there, again, it's all sponsor dependent.
Yeah, I think she needs to bring a check to the table. But, I mean, and I'll throw this to you, okay? Do you think that her, she's still, pretty high profile, even though, as Josh said, her lemon has no more juice in it. She's still pretty high profile, and it's going to be her farewell tour if she makes it. And she's picking the 2 highest profile races in the United States. Do you think she can attract a high enough dollar sponsor that can write a check that Chip Ganassi or somebody else will say, "Oh yeah, okay, good, we'll do this for you"?
I think she can come up with enough money to run 2 high profile races. And I think too, if she can get that deal, I don't think she'll have much trouble shopping that around to find someone that can put her in a car, because at the moment there are a lot of major teams that do not have their top cars fully funded for the entire year next year. So if she can bring any money to the table, they can do it. They're teams with enough resources, the bigger teams with personnel, they can field a car for one-off races. She could take that to several pieces. I mean, and a charter won't even come into play. This will be a one-off race. All she's got to do is have the speed to get in the show. Daytona's a little bit of a tricky deal. If you qualify good and you have good speed, first day of qualifying, that essentially locks you in. And if something comes up and you have to go through the 125s or the 150s now, you could be cut out. But I do believe if she can come up with a package there, someone will put her in a car. And same with Indy. I mean, that race is the biggest race in the one day event in the world. And I'm sure somebody will come along and put her in it, because just for the sheer publicity that she'll attract for the month of May, her being at Indy again and running will more than give a return for anybody that wants to sponsor that. So
absolutely, yeah. There'll be a lot of media eyes on it if she does that. But let's talk about her career as a whole. She was the darling of IndyCar for a while, and then she went to NASCAR, and she just kind of slowly, or rather quickly, tarnished her image, and she's one of the most maligned drivers, despite the fact that she comes in and works hard every week.
Right. Well, the biggest thing is she's a female, and she had that stigma she had to overcome as well. And that's always going to be the case for any female that goes into motorsports. That's part of that's what they're going to have to face. She did like so many IndyCar people have done in the past. She followed the money. She followed the money to NASCAR. And of course, I mean, from that standpoint, she did well. And she's probably set herself up for, well for the rest of her life if she never drives another lap in a race car. So, her NASCAR career didn't pan out, like I'm certain she wanted, or many other people wanted it to come to. But hindsight being 2020, I don't know what how I can Joey and Chris could probably answer this. How do you think she would have fared staying in IndyCar?
Silence from Joey and Chris.
Well,
go ahead, Joey.
I was trying to mute my microphone for courtesy purposes from all the laughter. That really depends. I talked to Bobby Rahal last week, and one thing because we started talking about her and a lot of the talk about next year and what's ahead, and we kind of looked to the past a little bit, and it's like, we had a lot of women in IndyCar that were pretty damn good. You look at somebody like Sarah Fisher, who was great, but never got that top equipment nod.
I think that's the female stigma.
Exactly, and Danica was really the first to. She did really well in Atlantics with Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. Then it was under a different name. I forgot all of it. But then you look at what she did in IndyCar, and obviously she did really well. Fourth her rookie year at Indy. She's finished as high as third there. And the only female that has led the 500 up to that point, and then finish on podium. So, and win an IndyCar race, But I think what's important here is you look at drag racing, and a woman winning in drag racing has become normal. Yeah. It's not huge when we hear about John Force's daughter winning in drag racing, and I think that's important. It shouldn't be something that's so monumental. And the sad thing is that in this kind of culture, that is the thing. But yeah. I guess to go and answer your question, Frank, I think that if she stayed with Andretti and was in top equipment, I don't know if she ever would have won a championship. I think she finished top 5 in the championship standings, maybe an extra win or 3, maybe an Indy 500 win because how well she runs there. She's solid on ovals, but I don't really know if she does anything that's more groundbreaking than what we've seen the women in drag racing do to the level that it's become normal.
Yeah, absolutely. So now Josh and Chris, you guys both want to jump in, so you can fight each other to do it, or you can flip a coin to see who goes first.
Yeah, I'll. Yeah, do you want to flip a coin, Chris?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Danica came in, and as Joey was saying, before the Indy 500 at the race at Japan, I remember watching that race, and she was leading a lot of laps, and then Indy she was topping the speed charts, and it seemed and she kind of stole the spotlight away from Dan Weldon there at Indy, who actually won the race, but then it's like since then I saw Danica, she drew the ire of some competitors. I mean, she was aggressive. She drew the ire of some competitors for being an aggressive blocker, which she wouldn't be the first driver to do that. But I would say earlier in Danica's career, before the merger in 2008, the competition level was different, and Danica on a strictly oval schedule, Danica was good. The old Indy car with a high downforce pack racing, Danica was good. But as the series transitioned into a more road racing based schedule, like in 2010, after the first 4 races, she was 16th in points. After I think it was Brazil, St. Petersburg, Barber and Long Beach, I think it was. She was 16th in points, and if you want to compare women drivers, Simona De Silvestro was higher in points in the oldest car on the grid, and Danica was in Andretti Autosport car. And even her last 2 years at Indy, she struggled to find pace. And remember in 2010, she said on the PA, it's not my fault the car's slow, and they kind of drew the ire from some people. Then 2011, it was the same old story. But then again, Andretti Autosport as a whole was off that year at Indy. I mean, if you look at it, Ryan Hunter-Reay even DNQ'd at Indy. But, it's just, and kind of bringing this, I think, full circle, the new Indy car is a whole different animal to drive. Not only is it turbocharged rather than naturally aspirated, but it's not about, just putting your foot down and turning left on an oval. This new car, you're going to have to lift, and that's something that Danica has. I think that's something that Danica will struggle with just because she's never done it before. But kind of maybe I'm counterpointing myself, but I think running Indy is a lot more about finesse than it is overall speed. So to that credit, that's probably why Danica's been so good there. So we could potentially see her go out with a swan song with a top 10, but I don't foresee her winning or setting the world on fire on her way out.
Yeah, neither do the rest of us, but it'd be interesting to see what happens. So I've got, guys, we're like at 2 hours and 11 minutes, so I've got one more topic I'm going to pull out of the bag. I'm going to throw it to Chris, since he's been in and out. I got one more topic for Chris, and then we're all going to make a bold prediction for 2018, and then we're going to wrap. Then we're going to wrap for the year, and we'll rejoin roundabout Daytona time. So, Chris, your topic to speak about: Youden Racing / Kyle Kaiser / 2018.
All right, this should be a good one. Youden Racing is looking at trying to make a full season entry in IndyCar next year. They have Kyle Kaiser for, I think, 4 or 5 races for next year. They're working at trying to get more funding to do the rest of the season, but we're going to see Kyle at the Indy 500 with Youden Racing. We're looking at Kyle trying to run some other races. I'm thinking, given that the Speedway is only 3 minutes away from the Youden shop, and I mean that literally, or maybe 5 at the most, we might see them at the Indy Grand Prix. I mean, it makes sense. You don't have to truck the cars very far. Heck, you can almost throw them there. We have a new car owner who's dumped everything he almost everything he owns into racing, and he's gotten a lot of return on his investment with Kyle winning Indy Lights this year to help get him into IndyCar next year. Juncos makes good decisions on what people to hire, and he's going to have a great team behind him to get into next year with IndyCar. All that matters now is getting the funding together to where you can actually run the rest of the races, because that's always the most difficult part of it.
All right, Joey, any thoughts on Juncos Racing? I know you've talked to Ricardo some.
Yeah, I think that, number one, it's refreshing to see a South American owner in the sport. I think it's good that there's that diversity. We actually have owners buying into IndyCar, where NASCAR, they're nowhere to be found. That should say something about the economics of the sport, number one. And clearly, one's trending upward, one's not. I think that they've got a good plan. He's doing it the right way. He's doing it through the Mazda Road to Indy. It's not just built for drivers. We're seeing that this path that IndyCar's kind of put forth with Dan Anderson of USF 2000 progressing to Pro Mazda, progressing to Indy Lights for the champion to eventually go to IndyCar. It now works with teams too, and it's showcasing with Juncos. He's a smart guy. He's going to do good things, and I'm excited for him. He's one of the great ones to talk to. Also, he's always there to help and give you the conversation, give you the quote, no matter how hectic everything is going on. And just for casual conversation, he's good too. He's not bigger than anything else that's going on around him, and I think that's important. Is that through all this growth, he's managed to stay human. So, I think he's got a bright future as a car owner going ahead, and he's going to do some big things in IndyCar.
Frank, what do you think?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think Ricardo is a great owner for the series. I hope they can get some more funding to keep Kyle in that car for the whole season. But right now they've got 3 confirmed. It's going to be Indy, Grand Prix of Indy, and then a TBA. But hopefully they're looking for some funding to get that thing for all 16 races.
I'll tell you this much. I know we got to cap this off, but usually the GP of St. Pete, every driver starts with that. Talking to Kyle Kaiser at Sonoma, we talked a little bit about that situation, and he said he's from California. He's from nearby in San Francisco. Santa Clara is just 30 minutes south where he's from. And one of the things that got brought up was like, hey, for Sonoma, for Long Beach, races that are near my hometown, I think I could find the funding for it. So those
are the ones he told me he'd like to do.
Yeah, so I think that there's a situation where he runs GP, and then we see what he could pull together out of his own pocket for something like Phoenix and Long Beach at the very least. And then, see what progresses. Obviously, the in-between there is Barber. If he can find a way to springboard Barber somehow, I think he can do, realistically, the entire first part of the season.
And, and it'll just help him develop as a driver to have that full season behind him. But, him and Ricardo will grow together as a team. Ricardo has hung his hat on Kyle, and Ricardo doesn't do things, spur of the moment. He doesn't bite off more than he can chew, and you can see that through his Mazda Road to Indy program. So, but with that being said, guys, we're way over time. We tried to do a 2-hour show, but we couldn't even do that. So, so let's go around the table. Everybody, one bold prediction for 2018. I'm going to start with you, Gray.
Well, I'm going to say we're going to continue to see Toyota's strength in NASCAR next year. I'm going to go out and say that I'm going to pick Kyle Busch as the 2018 champion of the series. I do think we'll see. Mr. Blaney return to victory lane. I think we'll also see good runs by continued good runs by Kyle Larson, and I think we're finally going to get to see Mr. Chase Elliott pick up multiple wins next year. He'll break out and win several.
All right, Gray, that sounds good. So I'm gonna mark you down for Chase Elliott wins multiple races. Richard, one bold prediction for next year?
Oh, can I go with 2?
No, you can have 1.
No, and 2.
Well, Gray
Not
had
fair.
Gray had 3, so you
Yeah,
get 1.
so-
Okay, 2. 2 for you,
Okay.
Richard, because I like you. Go ahead.
Kyle Larson to win the NASCAR championship. He could have won it if he hadn't had his engine blow up towards the end of the season on a couple of occasions. And in the Formula One world, I'm going to say there are going to be in excess of 6 different race winners next year.
Wow, that's pretty bold. That's pretty bold. Okay. Joey, you're next. You can have one bold prediction, but if you want to, Richard already set the bar for that. So.
Hey, Gray had 3. Come on. Favoritism.
Well, if we keep going declining, that means Seth gets -1.
Just because I'm British doesn't mean you can discriminate against me.
No, it means we can.
It's the exchange rate.
Yeah, I was going to say. 1776, bro. Joey, go ahead, man.
Mostly because I want to kind of review the off season and save a lot of these predictions for when we come back after the winter. I think Kimi Räikkönen will win a Formula One race next year to set himself up as, I believe, the only guy currently to win in each engine era that they've offered since he debuted in the series. And I think that would be three different engine eras for him, maybe 4. I'd have to double check that though.
All right, Seth.
Okay, so I think the trend of veteran drivers retiring is going to continue. I'm going to say Newman and Clint Bowyer might retire after next year.
So you're saying guys that get older are going to retire. That's your bold prediction.
That's really bold.
Man.
Yeah, well.
Man, you know what, Seth? Say Jimmy Johnson retires. That'd be bold.
I think if he
kind of
doesn't...
expect Newman to
how about
retire,
this?
to be fair.
Okay, how about this? If Harvick and Johnson don't win more than one race, they retire.
Okay. Chris,
I mean, it's
Chris,
the last
you're
year of
next.
Harvick's deal. That makes sense.
Chris, you're next.
All right. I'm going to also do 2 predictions. I'm going to do one for IndyCar and one for the Road to Indy. For Road to Indy, I think that Oliver Askew and Victor Franzoni are going to be champions this coming year in the categories they will race in, being Pro Mods and Indy Lights. And for IndyCar, I'm going to go ahead and call it. We're going to have another new first-time winner in Ed Jones. Where? I don't know.
All right. Bold. Josh, you're next.
I'm only going to take one.
Well, you can have as many as 5, from what I understand. Go ahead. Go ahead, Josh. I'm sorry.
Okay. Bold prediction: Elio Castroneves wins his 4th Indy 500.
That's a good one.
That's
a good bold prediction, Josh.
Chris.
Yep. All right. Now it's my turn.
Yeah, doing what I do best.
Wait, hold on. Bold prediction, Chris. Don't you mean Seth?
I'm referring to you. Yours wasn't that bold. Ed Jones is going to win a race next year. Yeah, the sky's blue.
Yeah, and Seth said old guys are going to retire. So I'm going to say a Honda-powered car wins the IndyCar Championship and the Manufacturers Championship. So that's kind of bold.
That's good.
That's kind of bold, but
Yeah.
I'm going to go with that. Won't tell you who, won't tell you when, but probably the guy from New Zealand. Anyway.
Hey, it is a bold prediction, by the way, because only Dixon's won for Ganassi in the last 3 years. So yeah, it is bold.
Yeah. But when's the last time Honda's won the Manufacturers Championship? Been a while. So we're going to go with that. And with that being said, I want to thank each and every one of you guys: Gray, Richard, Joey, Josh, Chris, Seth. Appreciate you guys being on. We're on our winter hiatus right now. We'll be back right in time to break down the Rolex 24 for you sometime in the winter months. But until then, I want to thank the Whoobazoo Radio Network for hosting us. I want to thank iHeartRadio, and I want to thank all you guys that listen to us. And good night. Talk to you soon.